The water treatment plant hummed all night, and Daniel Whitfield liked it that way. He was checking a pressure valve when the sky lit up orange outside the small window. He did not think much of it at first. Colony skies sometimes flared with cargo ships entering the atmosphere too fast. But this light was wrong. It dropped instead of leveling out, and a second later the ground shook under his boots. He ran outside with his flashlight still in his hand. Smoke rose from the hills past the grain silos. Sirens started a minute later, slow to react, as always in a colony this small. Daniel did not wait for anyone to tell him what to do. He grabbed the plant's old utility truck and drove toward the smoke. By the time he reached the crash site, a few colony guards were already standing at a distance, unsure what they were looking at. A ship, or what was left of one, lay broken across a wheat field. It was not built like anything human. The metal had a strange, soft shine to it, almost like it was alive. Daniel walked closer before anyone stopped him. Through a crack in the hull, he saw movement. Not machinery. Someone was inside. The guards finally reacted and pulled him back, but by then colony medical staff had arrived with cutting tools. It took almost an hour to open the ship enough to pull the survivor out. When they did, the whole crowd went silent. She looked almost human, but not quite. Her skin held a faint blue undertone, like moonlight caught under the surface. Her eyes were too large, too dark, and even half-closed they seemed to hold years of exhaustion. She wore a torn uniform lined with markings none of them recognized. Gold thread worked into patterns that looked more like art than rank. The colony doctor, a tired man named Foster, knelt beside her and checked her pulse. He shook his head slowly. She's alive, but barely. I don't know what she needs. I don't even know what she is. They moved her to the colony's small medical center, the best they had. A message went out to the nearest Alliance outpost, and within a day, alien officials arrived. They confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. The survivor was Ayara, a princess of the Solinari, a species from a system far beyond colony space. Her personal shuttle had been attacked by raiders, and she had crash-landed here by chance, in the middle of nowhere, on a colony that had nothing close to the medical technology her people used. The Solinari officials examined her and delivered their verdict without much emotion. Her body depended on a compound called lumini, something her species needed constantly to survive, the way humans needed water or air. Without it, her organs were slowly shutting down. The nearest Solinari medical station was weeks away, far too long a trip for someone in her condition. She has days, one official said. Maybe less. There is nothing to be done here. This colony does not have the resources. They spoke like they were closing a file, not discussing a life. Daniel stood near the back of the room during the briefing, having been allowed in only because he was the one who found her. He listened to the officials talk about funeral protocols and notifying her family, as if she were already gone. Something about it made his stomach turn. Not because he understood alien medicine, because he did not, but because giving up felt wrong, and he had never been very good at accepting things simply because someone with authority said them. That night, he asked the medical staff if he could see her. Foster looked surprised. There's nothing you can do, Daniel. You're not a doctor. I know, Daniel said. I just want to sit with her. Somebody should. Foster let him in. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of borrowed equipment trying to read alien vital signs it did not fully understand. Ayara lay still, her breathing shallow. Daniel pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, unsure what to say. He was not a man who spoke much, especially not to royalty from another star system. I don't know if you can hear me, he said finally. But everyone out there has already decided you're not going to make it. I don't know anything about your people, or your biology, or any of this. But I don't think somebody should just be given up on. Not like this. Her eyes opened slightly. For a moment, Daniel thought he had imagined it. Then her gaze found him, weak but aware. You are not a doctor, she whispered. Her voice was rough, but there was something sharp underneath it, some trace of the strength that had once carried a title. No, Daniel admitted. I fix water pipes. A faint sound left her, almost a laugh, almost pain. Then why are you here? Daniel thought about it honestly before answering. Because nobody else is. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face like she was trying to understand a puzzle. Then, slowly, her eyes closed again, and her breathing settled into something a little less strained. Daniel did not know it yet, But that simple, stubborn choice to stay in the room when everyone else had already walked away was about to change everything. Word spread through the colony fast, the way it always did in a place with only a few thousand people. By morning, everyone knew about the alien princess dying in the medical center, and most of them treated it like old news before it had even finished happening. Life went on. Farmers still checked their crops. Traders still argued over shipment prices. Daniel still showed up at the water plant, because bills did not stop just because something extraordinary had crashed into a wheat field. But Daniel could not stop thinking about her. He returned to the medical center after his shift, and Foster let him in again, mostly because no one else wanted the job of sitting with a dying alien. The Alliance officials had already started making arrangements. A small transport ship was expected to arrive in a few days, not to save her, but to carry her body home once she passed. They spoke about it plainly, without cruelty, but without much hope either. She is Solinari, one official explained to Daniel when he asked questions. Her body cannot function without regular doses of a compound called lumini. It is not simply medicine to her people. It is closer to a vital nutrient, something her body was built around from birth. Without it, her organs fail one by one. This is simply how it is. Can't you make more of it? Synthesize it somehow? Daniel asked. The official gave him a look that suggested the question was almost insulting in its simplicity. Lumini is not something created in a lab overnight. Even our scientists require specialized facilities. This colony has nothing close to that. Daniel nodded slowly, but the answer did not sit right with him. He was not a scientist, but he understood systems. Water systems, filtration systems, mineral balances. He had spent years learning how small changes in chemical composition could completely change how something behaved. Maybe alien biology was different, but maybe it was not as different as everyone assumed. That evening, he asked one of Ayara's surviving attendants, a quiet woman with silver-streaked hair who had been rescued from the wreck as well, if he could see any technical information about Lumini. She looked at him like he had asked to see royal secrets, which perhaps he had. "You are not a physician," she said. "You cannot help her." "I know I'm not a physician," Daniel replied evenly, "but I might understand parts of this differently than your doctors do. I just want to look." The attendant hesitated, glancing toward the closed door of Ayara's room. Finally, she pulled up a small data display and showed him a chemical structure, one that Solinari doctors used when discussing Lumini with outside species. Daniel studied it carefully, memorizing shapes and patterns the way he memorized pipe layouts back at the plant. Something about the structure looked familiar. He returned to the water treatment facility that night instead of going home. He pulled up old records from the mineral processing systems, compounds used to purify colony water and stabilize it for long-term storage. One synthetic mineral, developed decades ago by early colonists with no access to advanced alien technology, had a crystalline lattice that resembled what he had just seen. It was not an exact match, not even close, but there was a shape to it, a kind of chemical rhythm that felt too similar to ignore. He brought his notes back to the medical center the next morning, feeling nervous in a way he was not used to. Foster read through the papers with a confused expression. "Daniel, this isn't your field. I don't even fully understand what she needs, and I'm the one with the medical degree." "I'm not asking you to trust me," Daniel said. "I'm asking for a real breakdown of what Lumini actually does inside her body, not just the vague version everyone keeps repeating. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But nobody's even trying." Foster sighed, clearly torn between professional caution and the simple fact that nothing else was working. He agreed to ask the Alliance officials for a more detailed medical file. Later that day, Daniel was allowed back into Ayara's room. She was awake this time, though weaker than before. Her attendant stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him with clear suspicion. "You came back," Ayara said quietly. "Told you I would." She studied him again, the same searching look from before. "The others have already given up. My own people speak of my death as something settled." "I heard," Daniel said. "I don't think it has to be. You know nothing of my biology." "No," he admitted. "But I know water. I know minerals. And I know that sometimes the people with the most experience miss the simplest answers because they're too busy assuming they already know everything." Ayara's lips curved into something that was almost a smile, faint and tired but real. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Daniel said. For the first time since the crash, something behind her eyes shifted from resignation to something else. Not full hope, not yet, but curiosity. And for someone who had already been told she was going to die, curiosity was more than anyone had offered her in days. Rain fell over the colony for 3 days straight, turning the dirt roads into thick mud that stuck to every boot. Daniel barely noticed the weather. He spent his nights at the water treatment plant, surrounded by old notes, borrowed lab equipment, and a growing pile of failed attempts. The detailed medical file on Lumini had finally come through, thanks to Foster's persistence with the Alliance officials, and Daniel had read it more times than he could count. The compound was more complex than he expected, built from rare minerals that did not exist naturally on this colony. But the underlying structure, the part that made it work inside a Solinari body, was strikingly similar to a synthetic filtration mineral used in the plant's older systems. It was not identical. It could never be identical. But Daniel began to wonder if a modified version, something built from what the colony actually had, might function as a rough substitute. He needed help, and he needed someone who understood chemistry far better than he did. That was how he ended up standing in the doorway of Rosalind Hart's small lab space near the colony's agricultural center. Rosalind was known around the colony for being sharp-tongued and impatient with people who wasted her time. She ran soil and water analysis for local farms, work that required precision most people never noticed or appreciated. She looked up from her equipment when Daniel walked in, unimpressed. "You're the pipe guy who's been bothering Foster about the alien princess." "I prefer maintenance technician," Daniel said. "But yes." Rosalind crossed her arms. "You want my help synthesizing alien medicine using junk mineral compounds from a water treatment plant. Do you hear how that sounds?" "I hear it," Daniel admitted. "I also know the structural pattern is close enough that it's worth testing. I'm not asking you to believe it will work. I'm asking you to help me find out if it's even possible." Rosalind studied him for a long moment, clearly deciding whether he was serious or simply desperate. Something about his steady tone must have convinced her, because she finally sighed and gestured toward an empty table. "Show me what you've got." They worked late into the night, comparing Daniel's notes against real chemical data. Rosalind picked apart his theory piece by piece, but instead of dismissing it, she kept refining it. By the time the sun came up, they had a rough formula, unstable and unreliable, but theoretically close to matching Lumini's basic function. Their first attempt at synthesizing it failed completely, the compound breaking down before it even stabilized. The second attempt held together longer, but turned toxic under heat. The third attempt showed promise, but only in small, careful doses, and even then, no one knew how a Solinari body would react. Colony officials were not thrilled when they heard what Daniel and Rosalind were attempting. One administrator pulled Daniel aside and warned him bluntly, "You're using plant resources for an unauthorized medical experiment on an alien citizen. If something goes wrong, that's on you." "Something's already going wrong," Daniel replied. "She's dying. I'm trying to stop that." The administrator did not have a good response to that. Foster agreed to supervise the first real trial, mostly because he had run out of other options and Ayara's condition continued to worsen. The Solinari officials were informed, and most reacted with quiet disapproval, viewing the attempt as reckless. But Ayara herself, weak and fading, gave her consent. "If this fails," she told Daniel before the trial began, "it changes nothing. I was already dying. If it works," Daniel said, "it changes everything." The first dose was administered carefully, monitored by Foster and Rosalind together. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Ayara's vitals remained the same, weak but stable. Then, slowly, something shifted. Her breathing steadied slightly. Her pulse, which had been fading unevenly, found a faint rhythm that held a little longer than before. It was not a cure. It was barely an improvement. But it was something. The Solinari officials, when informed, remained skeptical. "A minor stabilization proves nothing," one said. "Her condition will continue to decline. This delays the inevitable, nothing more." Daniel refused to accept that framing. A delay means time. Time means we can keep improving the formula. Rosalind, exhausted but focused, agreed. "The base structure works, even if the current version is weak. We just need to refine it further." Over the following days, they adjusted the compound again and again, testing tiny variations, watching Ayara's responses carefully. Progress was slow and uneven. Some days brought slight improvement. Others brought frustrating setbacks. The Alliance transport ship meant to carry Ayara's body home was delayed once, then delayed again, giving them a small window of time no one had expected. Ayara grew slightly stronger with each careful dose, though she remained far from safe. Daniel barely slept, splitting his time between his actual job and the lab, running on stubbornness more than anything else. One evening, as Rosalind mixed a new batch of the compound, she glanced at Daniel with something between exhaustion and respect. "You do know this is insane, right? A maintenance worker and a soil chemist trying to outscience an entire alien medical system." Daniel managed a tired smile. "Yeah, but so far, insane is working better than giving up." For the first time since the crash, that felt true. A week into their work, Rosalind stared at a data screen filled with failed formulas and let out a frustrated breath. "We're stuck," she said. "The compound stabilizes her for a while. Then her body starts rejecting it again. We're missing something." Daniel rubbed his eyes, running on too little sleep and too much coffee. "Missing what, though?" "The structure matches. The base reaction matches." "The base reaction matches enough to slow her decline," Rosalind said. "Not stop it. There's a piece missing. Some kind of stabilizing element that keeps the compound bonded properly inside her system. Without it, the formula breaks down too fast." They spent another 2 days combing through both Solinari medical data and colony mineral records, trying to find anything that might fill the gap. Ayara's condition held steady for now, but everyone knew steady was not the same as safe. The Alliance transport ship, delayed twice already, was expected to arrive within the week. It was Rosalind who finally noticed something unusual buried in old colony geological surveys, information gathered decades ago during the settlement's early mining days. Deep beneath the colony, far past the layers normal mining operations touched, there was a rare trace mineral with an unusual atomic structure, something the original surveyors had noted but never found practical use for. It had been sitting in old records ever since, forgotten. "This might be it," Rosalind said, pulling up the data for Daniel to see. "It's not something your average filtration system would use. It's buried too deep, and there's barely any of it. But structurally, it could act as the missing stabilizer." Daniel studied the readings carefully. "How deep?" "Deep enough that it's not part of any active mining route anymore. The old shafts leading down there were sealed off years ago. Unstable ground, according to the notes." Daniel sat back, thinking it through. "Then someone needs to go get it." Rosalind gave him a look. "You're not a miner." "No," Daniel admitted. "But I know the plant's old excavation gear, and I know those shafts better than most people still working here. I helped repair drainage lines down there years ago." "That was before they sealed it off for safety reasons," Rosalind pointed out. "I'm aware," Daniel said. "But we're running out of time, and no one else is going to volunteer to crawl into unstable tunnels for an alien princess most people have already written off." Rosalind studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Then I'm coming with you. I'm not letting you die underground just to prove a point." They gathered old mining equipment from a storage shed behind the plant, along with breathing gear, portable lighting, and a small mineral scanner Rosalind had used before for soil sampling. Foster reluctantly agreed to keep monitoring Ayara while they were gone, though he made his disapproval of the plan clear. The old mining entrance was overgrown and half-collapsed, hidden behind rusted warning signs that had not been read by anyone in years. Daniel forced the outer gate open while Rosalind checked their gear one final time. "If this tunnel collapses on us," she said, "I want it on record that this was your idea." "Noted," Daniel replied, and stepped inside. The tunnels were dark, damp, and unstable in places, forcing them to move carefully around cracked support beams and loose rock. Every step echoed too loudly in the narrow passageways. More than once, small rocks shifted overhead, sending both of them freezing in place until the sound stopped. After nearly 2 hours of careful movement, Rosalind's scanner picked up a strong reading deep in a side tunnel that had partially caved in. Getting to the mineral vein meant clearing enough loose rock to squeeze through a narrow gap, something Daniel volunteered to do without much hesitation. It took nearly 30 exhausting minutes of careful digging before he broke through into a small hollow chamber. The mineral deposit was small, embedded in the rock wall, glinting faintly under his flashlight. There was not much of it. Barely enough for a single dose, if Rosalind's calculations were correct. Daniel carefully extracted what he could, placing the fragile mineral sample into a sealed container. Rosalind handed him through the gap. By the time they made it back to the surface, both of them were covered in dust and completely drained, but they had what they came for. Back at the lab, Rosalind worked quickly to integrate the new mineral into their existing formula. The process was delicate, and more than once, Daniel worried the small sample would be wasted in a failed attempt. But finally, after hours of careful adjustment, they had a revised compound that looked stable on every test they could run. They brought it to Foster immediately. The dose was administered under close watch, everyone in the room tense and silent. For a long moment, nothing seemed different. Then, slowly, steadily, Ayara's vital signs began to improve in a way they had not seen before. Her breathing deepened. Her pulse strengthened. Color that had been missing from her skin for days began to return. Foster checked the readings twice, as if not trusting them the first time. "This isn't just stabilization," he said quietly. "This is actual improvement." Ayara's eyes opened fully for the first time in days, clearer than they had been since the crash. She looked at Daniel, exhaustion mixing with something new in her expression. "You went underground for this," she said softly. It was not quite a question. "Had to," Daniel said simply. "We were out of other options." For the first time since the crash, Ayara allowed herself something she had not dared to feel until now. Real hope. News of Ayara's improvement did not stay quiet for long. Within 2 days, word reached the wider Solinari Alliance through the officials still stationed at the colony, and within a week, a formal delegation arrived to see the situation for themselves. Daniel expected relief, maybe even gratitude. What he got instead was suspicion. The delegation was led by a stern official named Doran, a tall Solinari man with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone. He toured the medical center, reviewed Foster's notes, and questioned Rosalind extensively about the compound's formulation. His expression remained unreadable throughout, giving nothing away. "You are telling me," Doran said finally, standing in the small medical room where Ayara now sat upright, stronger than she had been in weeks, that 2 colony workers with no formal medical training created a functioning substitute for Lumini, using minerals dug from beneath a farming settlement. "That's correct," Foster said, his tone careful but firm. Doran's gaze shifted to Daniel and Rosalind, lingering a moment too long. "Our own medical researchers have studied Lumini synthesis for generations. It is not a simple compound to replicate." "We didn't replicate it," Rosalind said, refusing to be intimidated. "We built a substitute based on structural similarities. It's not identical to Lumini. It's a workaround that happens to function." "A workaround," Doran repeated, as if the word left a bad taste. "Using primitive equipment, in a settlement with no advanced medical infrastructure." Daniel could feel the tension in the room shift. It was not simple caution anymore. It felt closer to resentment, though he could not quite understand why. Ayara, still recovering but sharp enough to notice the exchange, spoke before anyone else could. "You sound troubled by the fact that I am alive, Doran." The official's jaw tightened slightly. "I am pleased you are alive, Your Highness. I am troubled by the implications." "Implications?" Ayara asked, her voice steady despite her weakened state. "If it becomes known that colony humans succeeded where our own physicians declared the situation hopeless," Doran said carefully, "it raises uncomfortable questions. Questions about oversight, about assumptions, about how quickly this colony was written off as incapable." Daniel understood then. This was not about Ayara's survival at all. It was about pride, and about an alliance that had confidently declared a solution impossible, only to be proven wrong by 2 people with no formal titles or advanced degrees. Over the following days, the delegation created quiet obstacles wherever they could. Access to Ayara's room was restricted under the excuse of medical oversight review. Rosalind was pulled into repeated formal interviews about her methods, some of which felt more like interrogations than scientific discussions. Daniel was informed that his role in the matter was no longer required, a polite way of trying to push him out entirely. He refused to be pushed. "I didn't do this for credit," he told Foster one evening, frustration finally cracking through his usual calm. "But I'm not going to just disappear because it makes some official uncomfortable." Foster, who had grown genuinely fond of both Daniel and Rosalind over the past weeks, offered a tired smile. For what it's worth, I don't think you're going anywhere. Not if Ayara has anything to say about it. He was right. When Doran attempted to formally limit Daniel and Rosalind's involvement in Ayara's ongoing treatment, Ayara herself intervened, stronger now and clearly unwilling to tolerate the situation any longer. "These two saved my life," she said during a tense meeting with the delegation, her voice carrying the authority of her title for the first time since the crash. "Not your physicians. Not our advanced facilities. A maintenance technician and a soil chemist, using resources from a colony your officials considered beneath serious attention." Doran shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "If our people cannot accept that," Ayara continued, "then perhaps it is not humanity that needs reevaluation. Perhaps it is us." The room fell silent. Word of her statement spread quickly, not just among the delegation, but among the colony staff who had quietly supported Daniel and Rosalind's efforts from the beginning. Attitudes began shifting. Some Alliance officials who had remained neutral started openly acknowledging the accomplishment. Even Doran, though clearly still uneasy, stopped actively obstructing their work. Daniel, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, tried to keep a low profile despite the growing recognition. "I didn't do any of this to prove a point," he told Ayara one quiet afternoon, sitting beside her bed as her strength continued to return. "I know," Ayara said. "That is precisely why it means something." She studied him for a long moment, her expression softer than the political tension of the past days had allowed. "You did not see a princess dying in that wreck, Daniel. You saw a person. That distinction matters more than you realize." Daniel shrugged slightly, uneasy with praise as always. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ayara said quietly. "They would not have." Outside, colony life continued much as it always had, unaware of how close everything had come to ending differently. But inside that small medical room, something important had shifted, not just in Ayara's recovery, but in how an entire alliance was beginning to see the people of this overlooked little colony. A month after the crash, the colony square was more crowded than it had been in years. Word had spread far beyond the settlement itself, and people from nearby farming outposts had traveled in just to see the event everyone was now talking about. Strings of lights had been hung between the old grain silos, and long tables held more food than the colony usually saw outside of harvest season. Daniel stood near the back of the gathering, arms crossed, feeling distinctly out of place in the borrowed formal jacket someone had insisted he wear. Rosalind stood beside him, equally uncomfortable, tugging at her sleeves. "I still don't understand why we need fancy clothes for this," she muttered. "Apparently alien royalty has standards," Daniel replied. "Apparently," Rosalind said, though there was no real complaint in her voice. Despite the awkwardness, there was pride there too, quiet and well-earned. Ayara stood at the center of the gathering, fully recovered now, her strength and presence a world away from the fragile figure pulled from the wreckage weeks earlier. She wore formal Solinari attire, gold thread catching the light with every movement, but her expression held none of the distant formality Daniel had expected from someone of her position. She looked out at the crowd with something closer to warmth. Doran stood a short distance away, present but noticeably reserved, watching the proceedings with an expression that suggested he had accepted the outcome, even if he had not fully embraced it. Ayara raised a hand, and the noise of the crowd gradually settled. "When my ship fell from the sky," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the square, "my own people had already prepared for my death. Not out of cruelty, but out of certainty. They believed nothing could be done, and by every measure they understood, they were right." She paused, letting the words settle. But certainty is not the same as truth. While official reports discussed funeral arrangements, one person in this colony refused to accept that verdict simply because it came from someone with authority. Her eyes found Daniel in the crowd. Daniel Whitfield did not know my biology. He held no medical degree, no scientific title, no official standing that would have given him reason to believe he could help me. He had only stubbornness, and a belief that giving up on a person should never be treated as the simplest solution. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Daniel felt his face heat up under the sudden attention. He was joined by Rosalind Hart, Ayara continued, whose knowledge of chemistry, built not in prestigious academies, but through years of practical work on this very colony, made the impossible possible. Together, using resources this settlement was never meant to rely on for something so complex, they built what my own advanced medical systems failed to consider. She stepped forward, addressing not just the colony crowd, but the Alliance officials standing among them. For too long, my people have looked at settlements like this one and seen only limitation. Distance from our cities. Lack of advanced technology. A people considered simple, even primitive, by comparison. I was one of those who held such assumptions, though I never said so aloud. Her gaze softened as it settled back on Daniel. I was wrong. What this colony lacks in advanced infrastructure, it makes up for in something far more valuable. A willingness to try, even when success seems impossible. A refusal to measure a person's worth by their title, their species, or their supposed place in the universe. She turned toward Doran and the rest of the delegation. Let this be recorded clearly within our Alliance records. Humanity is not a lesser people to be observed from a distance. They are capable of extraordinary things, and this colony, so easily overlooked, saved the life of a Solinari princess through nothing but determination and ingenuity. The crowd erupted into applause, colony residents cheering loudly, some wiping away unexpected tears. Even a few of the Alliance officials, previously reserved, joined in with quiet acknowledgement. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and lanterns cast a soft golden light over the square, Ayara found Daniel sitting quietly near the edge of the gathering, away from the noise. "You disappeared during your own celebration," she said, sitting beside him. "Wasn't really mine," Daniel replied. "Rosalind did most of the actual science." "You both saved my life," Ayara said. "There is enough credit to share equally, though I suspect you would prefer to avoid it altogether." Daniel managed a small, tired smile. Something like that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colony lights flicker against the darkening sky. "I could return home now," Ayara said eventually. "My people expect it. There are responsibilities waiting for me." "But," Daniel asked, sensing there was more. "But I find myself curious," she said. "About this place. About the people who see value where others see nothing worth noticing. I think I would like to stay a while longer, if the colony will have me." Daniel glanced at her, surprised but not entirely so. "I think they'd be glad to have you." Ayara smiled, the expression far more relaxed than the composed formality she had shown the delegation earlier. "Then perhaps this is not the end of the story, Daniel Whitfield. Perhaps it is only the beginning." Above them, the colony lights continued to glow, and for the first time since her ship had fallen from the sky, Ayara felt something she had not expected to feel again. She felt truly, completely alive.